Welcome back to The Deep Dive, where we don't just scratch the surface. We tunnel straight into the foundations of the stories you thought you knew.
And today...
Yeah.
Well, today we are putting on the investigative gear.
We really are, because we think we've cracked open what is essentially a forbidden truth. A secret technical blueprint buried deep, deep within the official history of the Jaeger program.
You know, this is more than just some forgotten piece of lore. We're looking at what appears to be deliberate, high-level military misdirection.
A cover-up.
A total cover-up, a narrative that was carefully constructed to hide what was arguably the most ambitious and maybe the most ethically dangerous experiment of the entire early kaiju war.
And the machine at the dead center of this whole thing is one that most people have just written off, dismissed as what, an oxidized relic?
Exactly, Coyote Tango.
That's right. For almost everyone, Coyote Tango is just this primitive Mark I model, a desperate machine from those chaotic first days of the war. It's seen as this testament to archaic engineering.
But that's the official story. The moment you look past the armor plating, the moment you dive into the actual internal schematics, you find a technical capacity that, well, it just defies the fundamental laws of neural linkage as we were all taught to accept them.
And the official story is so good, isn't it? It's beautiful. It tells you this miracle of pure human will.
Of course. They told us what happened in Tokyo with Stacker Pentecost, fighting completely solo in that Mark I and somehow winning, was this impossible act of heroism.
A 1 in a billion shot. A feat of sheer human grit that was only repeated, years later by Raleigh Beckett in Gypsy Danger.
And when nobody told you, what they left out of the files is that this miracle was actually a calculated risk. It was a high-stakes field test of an advanced and very secret prototype.
We've analyzed the cold, hard data, and the technical reality is it's just inescapable. Coyote Tango wasn't merely a vessel for heroism. It was the possessor of the deepest secret in the entire early Jaeger fleet.
The capabilities it showed in that one major engagement, they should have been physically impossible for any conventional Mark I design. It's just not supposed to work that way.
So we're not analyzing a primitive relic here.
No, not at all. We are looking at an engineered anomaly, a deliberate manipulation of its core neural architecture that required billions of dollars in years of secret R&D. It set it completely apart from every other Jaeger built during that era.
Okay, so let's unpack this right now, because the story really starts to fall apart when you stop reading the heavily curated history books and you start digging.
Right, when you go into the archives.
The archival base sketches, the technical notes from Mirada Studios. These files, they're often passed over as just conceptual art, but they're not.
No, they're a map. They're a precise technical implementation map. They detail connections to the future, specialized control systems, and this is the key. What we now can identify as auxiliary processing modules.
Hardware that simply does not belong in a standard Mark I.
It has no business being there.
So our mission today is to unmask the massive lie surrounding Coyote Tango's origin. We are going to expose the true secret of the Lone Wolf of Pacific Rim, this highly classified Lone Wolf protocol.
And we're going to show you how this secret architecture, which was initially deemed a failure, actually became the technical heritage that saved the entire Jaeger program years down the line.
This is a deep dive into a sector of classified information the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps desperately wanted to bury. This isn't just about lore. This is the technical autopsy of the greatest secret of the early Kaiju War.
And we're going to show you exactly how this system operated.
All right, let's jump straight into what we're calling Section 1, the blueprint of the forbidden future. We have these original conceptual materials, right? The production notes, the schematics from the design studio. They look like art.
They do.
But you're arguing there's something much, much more substantial. You're calling them the actual map of a forbidden technical implementation. What makes these specific documents so compelling?
Well, what's genuinely fascinating here is the level of internal operational detail. It's off the charts for concept art.
What do you mean?
Standard concept drawings, they usually focus on the external stuff, right? The aesthetics, the curve of the armor, the look of the weapons, how it scales against the city skyline.
The cool factor.
The cool factor, exactly.
Yeah.
But these specific archives, they detail the architecture of control itself. They're showing the specific routing and the integration points for the neural interfaces.
Yeah.
And, most critically, the internal cabling layouts right near the con pod.
So they're not drawing the skin, they're drawing the nervous system of the machine.
Precisely. And that inner nervous system reveals a blueprint designed under a radically distinct logic
Right.
compared to the standardized Mark I assembly guidelines. the ones that governed other Jaegers of the time, like Tacit Ronin or Cherno Alpha.
And there's an immediate link that the official records just conveniently ignore.
They gloss right over it. It's this bizarre operational connection between the oldest surviving Mark I Coyote Tango and the future flagship of the program, Gypsy Danger.
So we have to ask the critical investigative question here. You have Stacker Pentecost and Raleigh Beckett. They are the only two pilots in the entire history of the Jaeger program who successfully solo piloted a massive Jaeger for an extended period.
Won a major engagement and lived to talk about it.
Exactly. If you're looking for a pattern that is a statistical anomaly so significant it demands a deeper look than just chalking it up to heroism.
And you have to challenge that official narrative. The idea that only two humans in an entire generation of pilots possess this impossible level of neural resistance. It just strains credibility past the breaking point.
So this is the key question, isn't it? Were these pilots fundamentally special? Were they unique genetic outliers with some kind of impossible neural fortitude?
Or did they possess special, secretly modified Jaegers?
And the evidence you found points overwhelmingly to the latter.
Overwhelmingly. I mean, think about it. If the ability to solo drift was truly just a matter of singular, impossible human capacity, why did the PPDC spend billions trying to recreate two-pilot stability through training and matching?
Instead of just finding more Raleigh Becketts.
Because they couldn't. They knew they couldn't. So they chose to engineer the solution instead. Coyote Tango's design wasn't just standard issue. It was experimental hardware compensating for a neurological impossibility.
Okay, let's dive into that. The core technical inconsistency that these documents reveal, if Coyote was a conventional Mark I, its architecture should have been dual input, balanced for two minds. What did the schematics show that was so profoundly different?
We found clear evidence of what the files actually referred to as auxiliary processing modules.
Oh, okay. What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, in any conventional two-pilot drift, the co-pilot is handling roughly half of the processing load. But this isn't just targeting or systems management. Critically, the co-pilot is essential for stabilizing the neural bridge.
Right.
Specifically, managing the limbic emotional feedback systems. The drift is so invasive that without that second mind there to filter and balance the sensory input or the stress feedback, a single pilot would just head down. They'd experience catastrophic neural feedback. Total sensory shutdown.
So these modules, these auxiliary processing modules, they were designed to compensate for the missing emotional and neurological ballast that the co-pilot normally provides.
That's it, exactly. They weren't there for offense. They were there purely to stabilize a one-person drift.
To integrate specialized hardware like that into a Mark I frame where space, power, and especially weight were at a massive premium, that suggests a critical specialized need.
It suggests they were willing to compromise every other aspect of the machine to achieve this one thing. And that kind of R&D wasn't cheap, and it certainly wasn't standard.
But how did the system physically integrate the pilot? It can't just be a buffer, can it?
No. And the sources point to a cabling arrangement near the ConPod interface that, and this is a direct quote, simply does not match the conventional Mark I standard.
It's a different wiring diagram.
Completely different. Standard Mark I neural cables routed balanced inputs from two separate pilots, merging the data streams into the core processor. A deviation this significant suggests a complete reconfiguration of the neural system. The design used the single surviving pilot's nervous system as the dominant and potentially the sole data input bridge.
This is critical. The pilot wasn't just directing the Jaeger. The pilot was becoming the machine's central nervous system.
That is the absolute essence of the Lone Wolf Protocol. The whole goal was to eliminate the middleman. By routing the entire computational load through one highly stressed neural conduit, the hardware, these auxiliary processing modules, had to instantly manage the computational overload and the psychological feedback that the absent co-pilot would normally handle.
Which means Coyote Tango was built from the ground up not to be a collaborative machine, but a highly unstable, exceptionally advanced solo platform.
A solo platform perfectly cloaked in the simple armor of an early generation Mark I.
The official history calls it an oxidized relic.
And we now know it was the forbidden blueprint of the future.
But if this tech was so advanced, why wasn't it immediately integrated into the Mark IIs? Why keep this secret buried so deep?
That's a fantastic question, and it really speaks to the catastrophic risks involved. I mean, we are talking about forcing a human brain to handle a load that would instantly cause psychosis or death in 99% of the population.
So even though Stacker survived?
Even though he survived the initial test run, the data suggests the system was incomplete. It was agonizingly difficult to control and incredibly expensive to maintain. They achieved solo control, yes, but at a neural cost that was likely deemed just unacceptable for mass production.
A successful proof of concept, but a failed production model.
Exactly. And the court chose to bury the successful concept rather than admit the financial expenditure on something they couldn't ethically replicate. To really get the military motivation behind this specific secret project, we need to set the historical context. This takes us to Section 2, the race for the ultra-precision weapon. We have to rewind the clock to the desperation gripping the world around, say, 2015.
2015, yeah. That was the absolute height of the Mark I program. And this wasn't just defense spending. This was a frantic, no-holds-barred global arms race.
Limitless resources were being poured into these defense machines. But the problem was the kaiju were adapting faster than anyone had predicted.
Much faster.
The initial Mark I designs were all conceived around brute force, right? Close quarters combat, wrestling the kaiju away from the shore. But the rapid kaiju evolution meant that standard brawling was no longer a guarantee of success.
They got faster, tougher, more resilient. If a kaiju reached the city, the damage was already done, even if the Jaeger eventually won the fight.
Exactly. So the strategists, they needed a new military doctrine. If they couldn't guarantee a win in that coastal brawl, they needed a system that could neutralize the threat with absolute certainty before it ever reached the coast, potentially far offshore.
And the strategic shift is the birthplace of the Coyote Tango project.
It is. It wasn't built for wrestling. It was conceived as the tip of the spear for this new doctrine. Ultra-precision attack at long distance. It was designed to be a steel sniper.
A steel sniper, I like that.
Its job was to intercept and neutralize the kaiju threat in the deep ocean, where collateral damage wasn't a factor.
Okay, so this need for ultra-precision, that immediately justifies the secret measures they took in its design?
It does. To achieve a single surgical strike at massive distances, the machine needs incredibly nuanced, rapid, and instantaneous control. Any delay, any millisecond lost to the negotiation between two pilots in the drift.
It becomes a critical liability. Right. A miss.
A miss, exactly. The goal was extreme, and so the means justified that extremity. The entire project was the physical representation of a military desperate enough to sacrifice everything, including the potential long-term neural health of the pilot, to keep the enemy off their land.
So if they could achieve that instantaneous, perfect neural control through a single pilot, the precision target lock would be maximized.
One shot, one kill. That was the dream.
And that runs completely counter to the core philosophy of the Jaeger program, which was built on the idea of duality and compatibility. The whole architecture of the drift demanded two minds for stability.
It did. But the military, under this secret project, they essentially decided to secretly engineer the machine to handle the dual mind load itself, instead of relying on the impossible task of finding two perfectly compatible pilots for a critical sniper role.
This technical ambition, it sets the stage for the true scale of the deception here.
The secrecy surrounding its technical capabilities was absolutely necessary because the program is moving into really questionable territory. They were attempting to functionally replace half of a human mind with specialized hardware.
It moves the conversation away from tactical needs and into pure classified engineering ambition.
It was the first, and possibly the most dangerous, attempt to bypass the human element of the drift entirely.
You know, whenever you want to find the true ambition behind any black project, you just have to follow the money. And that takes us right to Section 3, the secret financial anomaly, the big lie behind the budget.
The financial records just scream contradiction. And we are not talking about small discrepancies here. The budget allocated for the Coyote Tango program was almost double that of Tacit Ronin.
Tacit Ronin, another highly successful Mark I from the same generation.
Exactly. We are talking about billions of dollars in excess funding for a Mark I that externally looked fundamentally conventional, except for its long-range cannons.
But those external features, the armor plating, the size of the conventional weaponry, even the projected repair costs, they do not account for that massive surplus of money. So where did that cash go?
It didn't go into the visible features. It went entirely into the hidden investment, the specialized research and development for the solo drift hardware architecture.
Okay, walk us through that. What does that R&D spending actually look like? We can't just say billions and move on.
Well, it's exponential. First, you need classified R&D facilities, not just standard shipyards, but isolated high-security neural testing labs.
Right.
Second, you're developing exotic materials for things like neural dampening and enhanced processing modules. These aren't off-the-shelf semiconductors. They're likely high-grade, radiation-hardened components designed to handle extreme energy loads within a really volatile system.
And what about the human element? The salaries alone for the specialized personnel must have been astronomical.
Absolutely. You need the most specialized, highest-paid software engineers, neurologists, and systems architects to tackle this problem, and they're all operating under extreme secrecy.
Of course.
And on top of that, you need specialized hardware for neural load simulation, since you can't ethically test a catastrophic neural overload on human subjects over and over again.
No, you can't.
You have to build systems capable of simulating the full two-pilot neurological load and then training the hardware to compensate for the sudden loss of one of those inputs. That simulation hardware alone would cost hundreds of millions.
So the huge budget was paying for the hardware, the materials, and the people to effectively replace the functions of a human co-pilot.
That is the hidden investment. This massive financial anomaly reveals the true ambition of the project. Coyote Tango was the most ambitious Mark I project because the secret wasn't in its armor or speed.
It was in its ability to defy the very laws of the drift and achieve singular control.
Yes. And the source of this ambition is just as revealing as the expenditure. The files show the involvement of American scientists associated with the USAF.
The U.S. Air Force. Okay, that's the missing link.
It's the crucial missing link that explains the entire design philosophy. The USAF, institutionally, historically, operates under the logic of single-seat combat aircraft. They prize autonomy, singular command, and survivability tied to one elite pilot.
So a Jaeger designed to fail if one pilot drops. That's an unacceptable risk to a military used to the idea of single-pilot survivability, like in a fighter jet.
Exactly. They brought that deeply ingrained combat aircraft logic, and they tried to graft it onto the Jaeger program. They rejected the inherent vulnerability of the necessary two-pilot system as a design flaw.
They saw the co-pilot not as a feature, but as a bug, a temporary, unstable fix that needed to be engineered around.
And this, of course, explains the chosen codename, Coyote.
A direct, unambiguous reference to a predator that hunts alone. It survives where others fall, the ultimate survivor.
The entire design philosophy was encapsulated in that one name. The secret purpose of the excessive budget and the advanced R&D was the individual drift, the solo drift.
The hardware was explicitly designed to take over the co-pilot's functions, using the surviving pilot's nervous system's stacker Pentecost in that famous Tokyo fight as this hyper-stressed data bridge.
Yes, and the auxiliary processing modules were buffering the unhandled computational load just to keep the Jaeger operational, however painfully.
This fundamentally rewrites the history of that Tokyo engagement. Stacker Pentecost's survival was not purely a miracle of luck or grit. It was the extremely risky, potentially disastrous, live field test of an incomplete and experimental solo drift system.
It was a successful, though potentially career-ending, validation of their hypothesis. The financial anomaly is the definitive paper trail leading directly to the most dangerous secret experiment of the Mark I program. They paid billions to try and replace a human mind with titanium and wiring.
And the fact that they managed to successfully bury this financial and technical reality for so long just shows how ethically sensitive and militarily volatile this whole program was.
It was a failure in terms of standardization, but a triumph in terms of black project engineering. You know, the beauty of deep archival analysis is seeing how a buried truth in one file suddenly illuminates a canonical accepted event years later.
Right.
And that takes us to Section 4, the inherited code and the Mako Mori incident. This is where we turn a plot point into technical proof.
Okay, so this is where we bridge the gap. We go from the Mark I prototype, Coyote Tango, to the advanced Mark III flagship, Gypsy Danger. We have to establish that Gypsy Danger inherited this specific technical blueprint, this hidden heritage from that experimental program.
It is highly probable, just considering the timeline and the continued influence of U.S.-based engineering teams on Gypsy Danger's construction. While Gypsy was a Mark III, it was built using lessons, optimized designs, and likely digitized blueprints and hardware specs from its most expensive and ambitious predecessor.
And this technical heritage, it immediately clarifies one of the most puzzling parts of Gypsy Danger's operational history. Raleigh Beckett's solo survival.
Yes, Raleigh was able to solo pilot Gypsy after his brother Yancey's catastrophic death in the battle against Knifehead. He fought for several minutes before escaping the battered Jaeger.
And the official line credits his incredible neural fortitude. Just another hero, right?
Right. But if Coyote Tango had the experimental solo drift hardware architecture built into its core, then Gypsy inherited the latent risky capability.
So it wasn't just raw human will saving him. It was a built-in, though wildly unstable capability that was activated by extreme psychological and physical stress.
He was effectively activating a less stable, maybe more software-based version of the lone wolf protocol that Stacker Pentecost had pioneered years earlier. But the conclusive proof, the moment that technical architecture is just laid bare, is during the critical moment involving Mako Mori.
The Mako Mori incident. During her first full drift sequence with Raleigh, Mako gets lost in her devastating childhood memories of the kaiju attack.
And according to the official emotional narrative, this caused Gypsy Danger to stall or lose control or suffer a massive malfunction. It was painted as a failure of the pilot's psyche, an emotional weakness.
But we're going to reveal the technical truth of what happened in that con pod.
Exactly. It was not a malfunction, nor was it simply Mako losing emotional control. Gypsy's neural system was designed secretly to handle this specific neural scenario because of the Coyote heritage and the embedded solo drift architecture.
So what did the system actually detect in that moment of crisis?
The system detected that Mako had, and this is the key phrase, sufficient neural load to sustain the entire system on her own.
Okay, break that down.
When that traumatic memory flooded her mind, her neural activity, the sheer power and focus of her consciousness trying to survive, spiked to an extreme high. Remember, the solo drift architecture was designed to look for one singular dominant source of neural power capable of acting as the central data bridge, and she suddenly provided it.
So when Mako's memories flooded the drift, pushing her neural activity past the threshold required for singular command,
The inherited lone wolf protocol activated. This is the crucial pivot from lore to technical fact. The system calculated that the combined, albeit chaotic, load Mako was suddenly generating was more robust than the unstable load of two conflicting minds in crisis.
So the primary pilot, Raleigh,
He was deprioritized. His input was disabled by the machine because the system automatically prioritized the most viable single source of control. The neural system automatically activated the lone wolf protocol.
This completely reframes that entire sequence. The machine did not lose control because of Mako's trauma. It deliberately handed over total command to her.
It handed control to her because the embedded solo drift system recognized her spike in neural activity as an optimal singular input.
It saw her, at that moment of extreme neural overload, as the optimal single pilot.
Yes, for the advanced architecture it's secretly housed. Gypsy Danger, fundamentally, had inherited the advanced experimental neural systems developed for Coyote Tango. The Mako incident is not a flaw in the official story. It is the technical, operational proof of the shared secret program.
It demonstrates the latent existence and activation of the solo drift technology years after it was supposed to have been shelved.
The implications are staggering. It moves from a high-stakes emotional plot point to a cold, hard technical fact about machine architecture. The machine, faced with an imbalance and a spike of singular neural power, defaulted to the experimental solo protocol embedded in its deep code,
proving that the secret architecture of Coyote Tango was integrated into Gypsy Danger's blueprint from the very beginning.
That connection is monstrously precise, especially considering the level of effort they put into hiding the solo drift architecture initially. It confirms that the most successful Jaeger in history was carrying the buried, dangerous technology of the most secretive Mark I.
So we have laid out a pretty comprehensive chain of evidence here, drawn entirely from sources that were deliberately passed over or misclassified. Now, in Section 5, let's deliver the final verdict. Let's synthesize the evidence we've unmasked.
And we should be clear, this is a theory constructed from, disparate external files, production notes, financial records, operational data analysis.
Right.
However, when you place these independent data points together, the piece is just. They fit with a monstrous precision. It becomes very, very difficult to ignore the sheer weight of the evidence pointing away from coincidence and toward a deliberate engineering deception.
Okay, so let's systematically review that chain of non-coincidences, the things that point directly towards the Lone Wolf Protocol as a real, active, secret program.
First, you have the undeniable financial anomaly. The budget for Coyote Tango was double that of its Mark I peers, Tacit Ronin and Crimson Typhoon, with no visible or officially justified expense in its armor or conventional weaponry.
And that budget surplus directly funded the specialized R&D for the high-risk solo drift hardware and simulation.
Second, the architectural influence is just undeniable. The fact that scientists from the U.S. Air Force experts steeped in the single-seat combat aircraft logic were the ones leading the charge on this specific Mark I design.
which explains the motivation to eliminate the two-pilot vulnerability at any cost.
Third, the deliberately chosen codename, Coyote, symbolizing the solitary hunter and survivor. The name itself reflects the intended operational philosophy of the machine.
A high-precision, single-operator asset that did not rely on the inherent weaknesses of human collaboration.
And finally, the conclusive operational proof, the technical mechanism we saw in Gypsy Danger during the Mako incident. This was not an emotional crisis. It was the automatic technical activation of the inherited solo protocol.
It activated when Mako displayed sufficient singular neural capacity, forcing the system to operate on that advanced single-input architecture.
And if Gypsy Danger, a Mark III built years later, activated a complex neural balancing solo protocol, it could only have inherited that capability from the most technically advanced, most expensive, and most secretive Mark I project, Coyote Tango.
The Mako incident confirms the operational existence of the Lone Wolf Protocol.
And it firmly places its origin in the Coyote Tango project.
So this is the uncomfortable truth, isn't it? Stacker Pentecost's supposed miracle of solo piloting was actually a highly risky prototype test run. And Raleigh, Beckett, and Mako Mori only survived their own crises because they inherited the survival code from that exact, highly classified experiment years later.
The official narrative celebrates the grit. The technical archives prove the code.
And to affirm this, the depth and detail of those original Mirada Studios concept art pieces suggests that this advanced technical architecture and the subsequent activation of the Lone Wolf system. It was a real, intended, though ultimately buried, vision for the future of the Jaeger program.
The official records show you the political failure of the two-pilot system. The hidden archives show you the engineering ambition to fix it.
It stops being a series of coincidences when they all align perfectly along a singular investigative axis. The ambitious, costly attempt to solve the two-pilot vulnerability through hardware compensation, driven by a military doctrine that favored singular command.
The true legacy of Coyote Tango isn't its oxidized frame. It's the solo code that survived deep within Gypsy Danger to save the day.
We have spent this deep dive unmasking what we believe to be the best-kept secret of the Pacific Rim universe, drawing a straight technical line from a forgotten, highly experimental Mark I to the pivotal final defense.
We've seen how military desperation, financial opacity, and engineering ambition all merge to create this hidden architecture intended for singular, ultra-precise control, far exceeding the stated capability of its peers.
The system was imperfect, agonizingly unstable under prolonged use, but
undeniably effective in a crisis.
So, we return the decision to you. We have laid out the evidence, the double budget, the USAF influence, the operational proof in Gypsy Danger. Do you believe this is just a series of chain coincidences, a narrative whole that convenient storytelling just papered over with human heroism?
Or are we truly looking at the best-kept secret of the Pacific Rim universe? A deliberate technical deception that fully explains the impossible feats of Stacker Pentecost and the neural capability of Gypsy Danger.
We encourage you to re-examine the canonical events through this new hidden technical lens. Think about the moments in the lore that were previously explained away by luck or emotion.
Right. If the solo drift capability was latent in Gypsy Danger, what might that imply about the operational limits and sudden surges of power observed in other Jaegers? Perhaps those that also shared blueprints from the American or UN engineering corps.
And here is a final provocative thought that builds on what we've discussed. If the Mark I program, decades ago, was already testing solo drift technology, a terrifyingly complex and neurologically taxing concept, what other, even more dangerous and resource-intensive experiments were hidden within the designs and massive budgets of the later Mark V Jaegers?
And considering the catastrophic risks of the solo drift we saw in both Coyote Tango and Gypsy, Danger neural feedback, psychosis, debilitating fatigue. Why were the files pertaining to the neural architecture of those late-stage Mark Vs truly classified? Was it merely performance data?
Or was it evidence of even greater, more invasive attempts to bypass the necessity of human neural collaboration?
Perhaps integrating AI or non-biological systems to fully automate the copilot function.
We leave you with that lingering question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the forbidden files of the Jaeger program. We will see you next time when we dig into the next stack of sources.